All right, guys, so welcome back to Still Horse History Adventures. As you can see, there's a dirt road behind me, and if you look real carefully, you can actually see my motorcycle along with a buddy of mine's motorcycle sitting back there on the dirt road. But as you can see, there's plenty of mud between us and that. So as we were coming down the dirt road, we saw the mud. We had to go ahead and stop, get off, and walk the rest of it by foot. But what we're going to go to do today is we're here to see the burial site of Isaac Hayne and talk about who he was. This is actually his family land, by the way. No longer belongs to the family, but at one point it was 900 acres of plantation land out here. Now, to kind of explain who Isaac Hayne is, I need to explain a little bit of his background, where he comes from, because he really comes from money. Isaac Hayne was born on September 23rd, 1745. Wealthy planter family, primarily working in rice plantations. Isaac Hayne would inherit his family land at the age of 6 years old in 1751 with his father's death. Now, in his own lifetime, he is not only going to maintain this plantation, but he's going to pick up 2 other plantations. He will end up owning land out in Georgia. He'll own land in the backwoods of South Carolina. He's going to own 2 town properties, one in Beaufort and one in Charleston. He's also going to be an investor in an ironworks up in York. But all of this makes him a very prominent member of Charleston and South Carolina society. And what you find is that as the American Revolutionary War begins to kick off, men such as Isaac Hayne are going to be among the first to really, first off, kind of oppose, but then really join in into this idea of forming an American army. So you find that very common among the wealthy planter society at that time. So in 1775, he ends up joining a militia in Colleton County. Now, Colleton County is where his family land is, so it makes sense for him to go to that militia. He's first appointed as a captain of the militia, but he was hoping for the colonel's spot. And after a short period of time of not receiving the promotion to colonel, being passed over for it, he decides to resign his commission and instead re-enlist and serve as a private. He will continue to serve in the American military up until May of 1780 with the capture of Charleston by the British. When the British captured the city, they gave a lot of the militiamen there an option to be what we called paroled militia. Basically, if they take a vow to never again fight against England, they can return home and just remain neutral. Now, Isaac Hayne would have rather have been imprisoned, but he had received word that his wife and his children were sick. So he decided to take the parole option, and he goes home to spend the rest of the war kind of in a neutral state where he's not going to participate in any way. Unfortunately, less than a year later, we find that General Nathaniel Greene has taken down most of South Carolina back from the British, with the exception of Charleston. Now, the British are, of course, fearful of this, so they're going to go ahead and put a call out to all those paroled militiamen. They're going to tell them to come to Charleston and swear an allegiance to England. Now, begrudgingly, Isaac Hayne does exactly that. He heads over to Charleston and he goes to get this allegiance signed. Now, while he's there, he is informed, along with the other paroled militiamen, that they are going to have to, in fact, fight on the British side of the war. Feeling betrayed by this and that his entire agreement with the British was nullified by this action, he decides to instead escape and run and rejoin the American military. He is given the rank of colonel, he is given a regiment, and he decides to march back towards Charlestown. When he ends up heading towards Charlestown, he discovers that General Williamson, who is an American by birth but is a loyalist to the crown, is actually between him and Charleston. So he's going to go and do a raid against him, and he will successfully capture General Williamson. When he heads off and he captures General Williamson, Colonel Balfour of the British military launches a counterattack and successfully overruns the American military. He captures Isaac Hayne in the process, takes him back to Charleston, and Isaac Hayne was placed in the what we call today Provost Dungeon of the old Exchange. Originally it was just a storeroom, but during this time period they're going to house some of Charleston's citizens who have been captured. Now, Lord Rawdon, if I'm not pronouncing his name incorrectly, he is going to decide to make an example of Isaac Hayne. And he decides he wants to convict him of high treason and execute him. Now, not only does this send shockwaves through South Carolina, but this was considered, or at least viewed with great disdain, even in England. With the death of Isaac Hayne on August 4th, 1781, South Carolina goes into an outrage and begins really arguing threats of retaliation. General Greene writes to George Washington and asks for advice on how to proceed. George Washington, among other men, tell him to proceed with caution. Now, in October of 1781, George Washington defeats Cornwallis. He ends up doing that in the famous Battle of Yorktown, and that's going to be the last major battle of any consequence in the American Revolutionary War. So it's oftentimes viewed as the battle that wins the war. Now, Cornwallis is captured in this process, and South Carolina, sorry, I can't talk today. South Carolina immediately begins petitioning for the death of Cornwallis as retaliation for the death of Isaac Hayne. That's not what the American government and what the American military is going to decide to do, though. Instead, they're going to trade Cornwallis back over to England to get South Carolinian native Henry Lawrence back. So when Henry Lawrence is returned, that is going to satisfy South Carolina's need for vengeance or need for retaliation. We get one of our other major patriots back at that point. Henry Lawrence, just a quick backstory. We're not going to go too far into him, but he had been appointed in council with the Netherlands. He was trying to get the Netherlands on our side. England, of course, ended up launching a war against the Dutch right then in retaliation for their supposed aid and intended cooperation with the Americans. But I digress. So Isaac Hayne himself is oftentimes referred to as the martyr of the Revolution. He is without a doubt one of our Revolutionary War heroes, and where I'm at today is I'm at his burial site. Now you can see the large monument over here that says Hayne on it, but that's not actually where he's buried. That's a monument in his honor. He's actually buried right here. So I came out here today to be able to not only pay respects to Isaac Hayne, but also to inform you guys of who he is and that his burial spot is just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So if you're traveling down Highway 17 from Charleston towards Savannah, there's a break off to the right, Highway 64. As soon as you turn off of Highway 64, not even a mile up on the right-hand side, you'll see a sign that says the burial spot of Isaac Hayne. You'll come down a long dirt road and it'll lead you to this little picket fence area where you can find not only the resting spot of Isaac Hayne, but of his family members as well. There, of course, is a historic sign here and a little plaque to tell you more about him. But I encourage you to look up more about Isaac Hayne, and if you're ever traveling in the area, stop by and see his burial spot and pay respects to one of our Revolutionary War heroes. But guys, as always, check twice and save a life. Take care of each other.